Hey, great to be with you. President Trump is going to build a wall and make Mexico pay for it. The French are going to build a wall and make France pay for it. This headline says, Paris builds barrier around Eiffel Tower to limit terrorism. Paris is spending 20 million euros to build a protective barrier around the Eiffel Tower to replace temporary structures that were put up after a series of terror attacks. Sadly, the risk of terrorism hasn't gone away, Deputy Mayor Jean-François Martin said at a Paris press conference. It's not a wall, it's an aesthetic perimeter. That's what I call great branding there. Trump wouldn't have half this trouble if he said, we're going to build an aesthetic perimeter and make Mexico pay for it. Effectively, what they're doing is building a clear glass structure around the Eiffel Tower. So you'll still be able to see the Eiffel Tower. It'll just be in a big glass case. And you will have to go through a security check to get inside the big glass case and actually see the Eiffel Tower without looking through a window at it. This is what the world comes to. You can build a wall at the border, or you can build a wall around everything inside the border. And that's, in fact, already what they're doing in France. I spent months in France last year in the wake of all the terrorist attacks, the murder of the priest during Mass, the stabbing of a woman and her daughter in the little village I happened to be at, the 86 people killed in a truck attack on Bastille Day in Nice, on and on and on and on. And France is already in the situation where it's now frantically trying to build a wall around selected targets inside the perimeter. If you ever go past the Jewish school, it now looks like a prison. They've got huge walls and they've got razor wire and security cameras and all the rest outside it because they've had murderous attacks on Jewish schools. If you go to the synagogue, the centralized synagogue, they've kind of merged them all into one because it's easier to protect in Toulouse. They've got soldiers guarding it. They've got security guards searching your bags whenever you go into any kind of shopping mall. They have soldiers at post offices. They have soldiers in parks. They have soldiers at schools. They have soldiers on the topless beaches, which is a faintly surreal sight to see nude sunbathers with soldiers with semi-automatic weapons patrolling in between. I don't quite understand why the soldiers are wearing jungle camouflage to patrol a nude beach. It would make much more sense to wear a nude bodysuit, I would have thought. But at any rate, that is what happens when you do not have a border. You have to, instead of building a wall at the border, have to build a wall around every single thing inside the border, until eventually you have a beautiful city like Paris with a famous landmark like the Eiffel Tower, and they have to construct a glass wall around it. That's actually the background against which President Trump is making changes to US immigration. That a land without a border is nothing. It's just a piece of real estate anyone can pass through. A nation without borders is not a nation. And that is the situation that Europe is in, and that is the situation the United States is in. Interestingly, Trump's proposed Muslim ban that he proposed in the course of the election is hugely popular throughout Europe. Chatham House, which is one of the world's most influential think tanks, Chatham House in London, has just polled 10 European countries and found overwhelming support for a permanent ban on Muslim immigration to their countries. So if Trump had proposed what he proposed in the United States, if he'd proposed it in Germany, if he'd proposed it in France, if he'd proposed it in any Eastern European country, it would have been massively, overwhelmingly popular. The problem that many Europeans have is actually finding politicians who are willing to advocate the policies that the European people support. Here, it's all a little different. The guy can run on a particular platform, he can get elected, and then when he tries to implement that platform, all the other non-democratic levers in society are arrayed against him. We're still in this weird situation at the moment where we're waiting for three rather unimpressive third-rate judges to litigate American immigration policy, which is an absurd situation. And as I said on Monday, discussing the 65th anniversary of the Queen's accession following the death of King George VI, the King's Speech guy, as I said on Monday, there's not a lot of point in throwing off a monarch if you're prepared to prostrate yourself before every rinky-dink guy who happens to be wearing a black robe rather than an ermine robe. And the deference toward judges as they insinuate themselves into more and more areas of American life is unbecoming to a free people. America, my friend and former boss Conrad Black likes to point out, employs as many lawyers as the rest of the planet combined. That's a startling statistic. And what it means, of course, is that there's an awful lot of bad lawyers in this country, simply on the law of averages. In other words, the likelihood is that America has as many bad lawyers as the rest of the world combined. So you can hire a big fancy hotshot lawyer from Los Angeles, and whether you're actually getting your money's worth is highly dubious. And that's how it went at the Ninth Circuit this week. A fellow called August Flincher, I think that's how you pronounce his name, although I'm not terribly bothered if it isn't, was representing the Justice Department of the United States at the Ninth Circuit to defend President Trump's executive order restricting immigration from 7 nations that happen to be Muslim majority, but more significantly are for the most part failed states that do not have any reliable documentation. And in one striking case, that of Iran, happens to be the biggest state sponsor of terrorism on the face of the planet. August Flincher was the guy making the Justice Department's, and in effect President Trump's case, to the Ninth Circuit. And he did a stinker of a job. As I said, America employs as many lawyers as the rest of the planet combined. But you would think that if you reach the level by which you're employed by the Justice Department of the United States, that you would at least be a semi-competent lawyer. And this guy wasn't semi-competent when he was questioned by the jurists of the Ninth Circuit. In particular, the 2 liberal jurists on that panel, William Canby and Michelle Friedland, were trying to determine the basis by which President Trump and the government had picked these 7 countries. And they were asking various questions, including questions about statements that President Trump had made when he was candidate Trump way back during the election campaign. And August Flincher floundered around trying to answer these questions. It was true that he wasn't actually up to speed on things. You'll recall, for example, that in the original lawsuit, this Judge Robard confidently asserted that nobody from these 7 countries had committed a terror offense in the United States since 9/11. In fact, the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee has determined that at least 60 people born in the 7 countries have been convicted. That's to say, not just arrested, not just charged, but convicted, found guilty of terror offenses in the United States since 9/11. And that list didn't even include the most recent one, which was the big stabber by a Somali who stabbed people and ran down people with his car at Ohio State University a couple of months ago. He's a guy who gamed the refugee system. He'd been living in Pakistan for 7 years, which isn't a country with a refugee program with the United States. So he was happily resettled in Pakistan, but still nonetheless managed to pass himself off as a Somali refugee for the purposes of admission to the United States. And then he went and stabbed a bunch of people. But there's no need, even if August Fletcher had known this stuff, had known it, he shouldn't be getting into these games with judges. A judge is in no position to know whether somebody from Somalia is more risk to the United States than someone from Sudan. He's in no position, no judge is in a position to rule on that. And a judge who presumes to explore the government's position on the merits of banning Somalis versus the merits of banning the Nepalese is many things, but he is not a judge. That is not what judges do in any healthy society. And since nations began organizing themselves into sovereign states, it has been an accepted principle across all countries, across all time, that it is the sovereign state, it is the government, it is the executive branch that determines the immigration policy of the nation. That happens to be true in America too. Just a few years ago, just a couple of years ago, when Arizona started arresting people and trying to determine their immigration status, the courts slapped them down on the basis that immigration is the sole purview of the federal government for which it must be granted the greatest discretion in determining and identifying the needs of the United States with respect to immigration. And so in the Arizona case, the feds stomped all over. Arizona simply had been overwhelmed by illegal aliens, wanted to find out who was in its country, wanted to know the immigration status of people in its country, and the feds didn't want to enforce immigration law. And the court said the feds can do what they like with immigration law, and you, the states, have no say. That's when Obama's in office. Now that Trump's in office, this no-name judge has decided that states have standing, suddenly, mysteriously, when it comes to immigration law. So August Fletcher, the lawyer, the genius lawyer who's made it all the way to the US Justice Department, doesn't know anything about the case. And he flounders around, and he admits he doesn't have the answers to the questions the justices are asking. The correct answer to the questions that these judges, William Canby, Michelle Friedland, these so-called judges, as Trump might say, and as he would rightly say, these so-called judges are asking entirely irrelevant questions. Has the government pointed to any evidence connecting these countries with terrorism? That's none of your business, Your Honor, is the correct answer to that. That is irrelevant to these proceedings, Your Honor, is the correct answer to that. Now, the day after this pitiful performance by the Justice Department in the Ninth Circuit, Trump, who was at a meeting with sheriffs, actually gave a much better legal argument simply by standing up there and quoting the law, which is as plain as the nose on anybody's face. Suspension of entry or imposition of restrictions by president. Whenever the president finds that the entry of any aliens or of any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, the president may, by proclamation, and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem to be appropriate. And the correct response to Judge Michelle Friedland and Judge William Canby of the Ninth Circuit is, what part of the president may by proclamation suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens? What part of that don't you understand? It's not something that's subject to interpretation. It's written there in plain English. And it refers to the entry of any aliens or any class of aliens. So in other words, if he wants to ban Canadians, he can do that. If he wants to ban Christian Canadians, he can do that. The president has the right to determine which aliens are admitted to the United States and which are not. And that is as it should be, and that is the prerogative of the executive branch and of the head of state in nations since the Treaty of Westphalia. It's nothing new, it's nothing novel, it's one of the basic and most fundamental aspects of national power. Until half a century ago, it was taken as granted that no nation was under any obligation to admit the citizens of any other nation. When a Canadian is admitted to America, he is admitted as a guest at the discretion of the government. And I say that as a foreigner. And likewise, there is no inherent right of the entire world, of the 6 billion people in the developing world, to move to the advanced world, to the developed world. No right whatsoever. It's fascinating to listen to these judges, to listen to the people who want this law thrown out, to listen to the immigration advocacy groups use the most sophisticated kind of arguments. The Equal Protection Clause. The Equal Protection Clause of the United States supposedly now applies to all 7 billion people on this planet, most of whom have never set foot in the United States and have no right of entry to the United States. And they are not covered by, under any definition, they are not and cannot be covered by the Equal Protection Clause. And it's patently absurd to suggest that they can be covered by the Equal Protection Clause, except that under this kind of decadent sophistry, people are making this argument. And you should always listen very carefully when people are telling you what they're planning for you. As I said, in France and Germany and most European countries, they've no idea who they've let in. All they know is that suddenly they're having to have soldiers patrolling nude beaches. All they know is that suddenly Scandinavian police chiefs are having to advise women that they can't go out after dark unaccompanied. All they know is that 70% of German women no longer feel safe in railway stations and on trains and other public places. If you lose control of your perimeter, it doesn't matter how many things you fence off within the perimeter, you no longer have a nation. And these sophists' arguments, these absurd arguments that people who are not US citizens, people on the other side of the world with no right of entry to the United States, that the government of the United States has no right to prioritize which categories of people it admits and which it chooses not to admit, is, as I said, not just absurd, but decadent and deeply disturbing. And I would add one other thing too, that it's interesting to me that the left pretends to be internationalist. America has certain treaty obligations. It has certain international conventions that it's a signatory to. And for example, the Convention on Refugees obliges one to discriminate. There is no equal protection clause when it comes to refugees. you have to be at risk of persecution. You have to be a minority at risk of persecution in certain refugee contexts under the international conventions to which the United States is a signatory. So it is actually in breach of the United States treaty obligations for it not to discriminate, say, with Syrians in favor of Christians rather than Muslims, because Christians in ISIS-held lands are at risk not just of persecution, but of being burned alive. And that's why their need for admission to the country is far greater than, say, a fit young man who's just decided that he doesn't want to pick a side in the civil war his country's in the middle of, and he'd rather sit it out, having a grand old time and whooping it up in the Western world. We are actually in breach of our treaty obligations if we do not, in breach of our international obligations, if we do not discriminate in favor of, quote, classes of aliens, i.e. the persecuted minorities as opposed to the non-persecuted majorities. As it happens, I'm not in favor, actually, of admitting Christians to the United States or to Europe, because I don't think that's the answer. I think it would be a tragedy for the world and a shaming moment in the American century, in the American moment, and at a time of Western dominance, were Christianity to be cleansed from the very part of the world where it was born. So I'm in favor of Christian communities remaining strong and remaining in place. But let's not be in any doubt here. The argument that is being advanced in these courts and that has been supported by at least one judge and now appears to be supported by at least 2 out of 3 judges at the Ninth Circuit is essentially the opposite of what's happening around the Eiffel Tower. They are dissolving the aesthetic perimeter. They are dissolving the world. And they are saying the United States Constitution and the Equal Protection Clause apply to all 7 billion people on the planet, including the 6 2/3 billions who are not US citizens and do not live in the United States. If the United States Constitution applies to everybody on the planet, it applies to nobody on the planet. It is a meaningless document. And that, in effect, is the argument these guys are making. This is Mark Steyn. I'll see you next time.